Welcome to my channel. If you are visiting this page for the first time, you are also highly welcome. In this lecture, I'll be looking at the rectouterine pouch. Using this image by the side, this is where we have the rectouterine pouch here, carved out in red. This pouch is a space or a recess that is located between the uterus and also the rectum. In this lecture, we'll be looking at how this pouch is formed, the boundaries of the rectouterine pouch, and also its clinical anatomy. The rectouterine pouch can also be referred to as the rectovaginal pouch, and would be highlighting why it can so be referred to as the rectovaginal pouch as we go through with this lecture. The rectouterine pouch can also be referred to as the pouch of Douglas. It is a peritoneal fold that extends from the posterior region of the uterus to the anterior wall of the rectum. We've tried to highlight this in our previous slide. Using this image by the side, this is where we have the rectouterine pouch that can also be referred to as the rectovaginal pouch or the pouch of Douglas. And this is what is carved out here in red. This rectouterine pouch is located between the uterus anteriorly and also the rectum posteriorly. And this is what is harrowed here in this image. So let's drive through the functions of the rectouterine pouch. This pouch is responsible for providing structural support for the organs or structures that it anchors. If you look at it, we say that it extends from the posterior region of the uterus to the anterior wall of the rectum. So it is seen to be providing structural support for these two structures. It is also seen to help allow for easy sliding between these two structures. If you look at the uterus anteriorly and also the rectum posteriorly, you see that they are closely related. And these structures are seen to slide over each other. So to allow for easy sliding to prevent friction, the rectouterine pouch is seen to enhance this process. It is important for us to add that in the anterior region of the uterus, we also have another pouch created that is referred to as the uterovesical pouch. This is what is carved out here in purple. If you look at the configuration of the uterovesical pouch, you see that it is not as wide as what the rectouterine pouch presents. And it is important that we're able to highlight this. And this narrowness created by the uterovesical pouch is as a result of the anteverted position of the uterus. Because the uterus, we say that it is antevertedly placed over the urinary bladder. And because of this, it is seen to close up the space that is created in the anterior region, specifically where the uterovesical pouch is formed here. And this is why you see that this space is narrow when compared to the rectouterine pouch behind the uterus. And also, this wideness of the rectouterine pouch can also be attributed to the anteverted position of the uterus. Because say the uterus is directed more anteriorly, which is its anteverted or anteflex position. The direction of the uterus is towards the anterior abdominal region. And this is why it is seen to create more space around this posterior region. So we can try to justify the differences in terms of how the rectouterine pouch and also the uterovesical pouch are created. And if you drive in deep into the name rectouterine, if you try to break down the name, as I've always said on this channel, the recto means rectum and uterine means uterus. So it is a pouch or a recess created between the uterus anteriorly and also the rectum posteriorly. So let's drive through this slide where we'll be describing or illustrating how the rectouterine pouch is formed. Remember, we described in our previous slide that the rectouterine pouch is formed between the posterior surface or region of the uterus and also the anterior wall of the rectum. If you look at how the peritoneum are lined in the uterus, we say that in the anterior border, the peritoneum line is limited to the isthmus. We try to describe it in our lecture on the uterovesical pouch. If you've not checked up that lecture, please kindly go and do so. This is where we have the uterus, and behind here we have the rectum. We say in between these two structures is where we have the rectouterine pouch that is highlighted here in yellow. In this anterior region here, we say we have the uterovesical pouch that is smaller in terms of its configuration. And we'll try to justify why it is so. We try to attribute this to the anteverted position of the uterus, where it is chopping into the space that is created in anterior region and also allowing more space here at the posterior region. This is due to the anteverted position or anteflex position of the uterus. So if you go to the anterior region, you see that the peritoneum covering the anterior region of the uterus is limited to the isthmus, which is the narrow constricted region of the inferior border of the body of the uterus. And this is where you then have this extension over the base of the urinary bladder. This is what is created in the anterior region here of the uterovesical part, which is the part that is created between the uterus and also the urinary bladder. We say urinary bladder is vesicle. So if you go more to the posterior region, we also have peritoneal covering the posterior region of the uterus. And if you look at the alignment of peritoneal covering of the posterior region of the uterus, you see that it descends more inferiorly than what is seen in the anterior part. In the anterior part, the peritoneal covering is limited to the isthmus, which is the narrow constricted point of the body of the uterus. But posteriorly, you see that the peritoneal covering descends more inferiorly, even extending to the point where we have the vaginal fornix before it is seen to then arc upward, where it is then finally seen to line the anterior border of the rectum. And this is what is projected here in this image. And if you see that peritoneal covering of the posterior region of the uterus descending as far as the vaginal fornix, and this is where we say that the rectouterine pouch can also be referred to as the rectovaginal pouch, because it also descends down to the upper region of the vaginal canal, which is the vaginal fornix. And this is where the name is also being drafted. So you can refer to this pouch as the rectouterine pouch or the rectovaginal pouch, because the peritoneal covering at this posterior surface of the uterus is seen to also descend further down to the level where we have the vaginal fornix. And this pouch is also referred to as the pouch of Douglas. So you see it then folding and hacking over itself, forming a double layer of peritoneum around the space. And this is where it is finally seen to then line onto the anterior surface of the rectum. If you drive into the rectum too, you see that the peritoneal covering of the rectum too is very dramatic. We also tried to establish or highlight this in our previous lecture on the rectum. If you check off that lecture, please kindly go and do so. In the rectum, we have a very dramatic and interesting pattern of peritoneal covering. If you try to divide the rectum into thirds, you see that the superior two-thirds of the rectum is what is seen to be covered with peritoneum, while the inferior one-third is seen as an extra peritoneal organ, which means it does not have peritoneal covering. So if we drive in deep into the superior two-thirds, you see that the superior one-third, the anterior and the lateral surfaces of the superior one-third of the rectum is covered by peritoneum, while the middle third is covered only in its anterior region. So you see that it is just the superior two-thirds, which include the superior one-third and the middle one-third, that is covered by the peritoneal covering. And you see it on its anterior surface. And we've tried to describe how the peritoneal covering of the rectum is. So if you go more inferiorly, where you then have the inferior third, the inferior third is not seen with peritoneal covering. And if you look at this image, you see that the peritoneal covering actually does not extend down to the inferior one-third. This half, where the peritoneal covering coming from the posterior border or surface of the uterus down to the fornix of the vaginal canal, back over the anterior border or surface of the rectum at the level of its superior two-thirds. So it is just the superior two-thirds of the rectum that is covered with peritoneal covering. And this is how we have the formation of the rectouterine pouch that can also be referred to as the rectovaginal pouch. And we'll try to illustrate why it can also be referred to as the rectovaginal pouch, because the extension of the peritoneum also goes down to the point where we have the vaginal fornix. This pouch we say can also be referred to as a pouch of Douglas. So this is how it is formed. But in male, we do not have the rectouterine pouch, and we also do not have the uterovesical pouch. If you try to break down those names, you see that they have uterus in them. The male are not seen to carry the uterus. So we do not have this pouch is created in male. So in male, because we do not have the uterus, then we say that the pouch that will be created in male will then be the rectovesical pouch, which is a pouch that will be created between the urinary bladder and also the rectum. So if you try to imagine that the uterus at this point here is removed, you see that the rectum will be placed behind the urinary bladder. Then you then have a pouch created between the urinary bladder and also the rectum. And this is what is referred to as the rectovesical pouch. We say that recto is rectum, while vesical is the urinary bladder. So this pouch is created between these two structures in male. And if we remember also that the prostate gland in male is located around the exit here of the urinary bladder. So you see it positioned around this region where this arrow is pointing. And this means that this rectovesical pouch will be created between the urinary bladder and the prostate gland anteriorly, and also the rectum posteriorly. So it is important that we are able to highlight this in case we are asked during examination that the rectouterine pouch and also the uterovesical pouch are not seen in male. Their pouch is created around the anterior and the posterior borders of the uterus, and so they are just seen in the female. So let's drive further to highlight the boundaries of the rectouterine pouch. We already established where this pouch is created behind the uterus, and this is the pouch here highlighted in red. So to go into the structures that are seen to form the different borders of this pouch. Anteriorly, we should know that the uterus will be located in the anterior part of this pouch. And this is where we have the uterus here carried in green. But if you go more inferiorly around the anterior border of the rectouterine pouch, you have the posterior fornix of the vagina. Remember that inferior continuation of the uterus is the vaginal canal, while at the upper region of the vaginal canal here, we have the fornix created. Posteriorly behind, we have the posterior fornix. So this posterior fornix will be forming the anterior border of the rectouterine pouch. So posteriorly, the structure that you see behind is the rectum, and this is what is harrowed here in blue. This is understandable, but specifically it will then be the superior two-thirds of the rectum that will be seen to border the rectouterine pouch in the posterior region. We say that the inferior one-third is not seen with peritoneal covering. And if you look at it at this inferior region, the peritoneal extension does not extend down to its anterior surface. It's just limited to just the superior two-thirds. And this is what we then be seeing to form the posterior boundary of the rectouterine pouch. And this is understandable. So if you go more superiorly above here, you have the peritoneal cavity. And this is what is harrowed there at this point. So the rectouterine pouch is seen to be continuous superiorly with the peritoneal cavity. This kind of presentation is also seen in the anteriorly placed vesicouterine pouch or the uterovesical pouch in the anterior part. Remember in that lecture, we highlighted that the superior border of the uterovesical pouch also is continuous with the peritoneal cavity. We know that the peritoneal cavity is created at this upper region here, which is the space that is created between the visceral peritoneum and also the parietal peritoneum. So these two pouches are seen to be superiorly continuous with the peritoneal cavity. So this is what is seen in the superior border also of the rectouterine pouch. So if you go more inferiorly, the structure that you would see is the rectovaginal fold. There is a fold created at this region that is harrowed there in purple between the upper region of the vagina here and also the rectum. So this fold is what is seen to form the inferior limit of the rectouterine pouch. So let's drive through the clinical anatomy. The accumulation of abscess, fluid, or infection in the rectouterine pouch. Remember when we tried to describe the borders of the rectouterine pouch, we said that superiorly is continuous with the peritoneal cavity. So fluid or infection within the peritoneal cavity can spread and enter into the rectouterine pouch because it is continuous with it inferiorly. And this basically can be attributed to the wideness of the rectouterine pouch. Remember when we tried to compare the alignment of the rectouterine pouch and the vesicouterine pouch in the anterior part, we said that the vesicouterine pouch in this anterior region is narrow, while posteriorly, where we have the rectouterine pouch, is wider. And we try to justify why this is so because of the anteverted position of the uterus. It seems to be creating more space around this posterior region. And this wideness also creates more avenue for fluid within the peritoneal cavity to also be drained into the rectouterine pouch. And this is what is harrowed there in black. Also is the fact that the rectouterine pouch is seen at the inferior border of the peritoneal cavity because we already described that superiorly, the cavity that we have above is the peritoneal cavity, while inferiorly we have the rectouterine pouch. So it's an inferior continuation with it. So any structure or substance is seen in the peritoneal cavity, we have the means or the capacity to extend or drain into the rectouterine pouch. And this is what is exhibited here during the process of fluid accumulation or abscess. And a process called choledocentesis is used to drain this fluid. And this is done by inserting needle through the vaginal canal to extract the fluid that is located within the rectum. rectouterine pouch. Remember when we tried to describe the anterior border or structures that are related to the rectouterine pouch? We said that the vaginal fornix is one of the regions that is seen to border anteriorly the rectouterine pouch. So it is through this same vaginal canal, this upper end, that the needle is inserted, where it will be gaining access into the rectouterine pouch to drain the fluid that is collected at this point. So thanks for watching. Let's continue to stay glued to this channel.